Okay, so we're going to get started here. So welcome everyone to the third annual Roger Ebert Lecture. I'm Julie Turnock. I'm the director of the Roger Ebert Center for Film Studies, and so our very brief order of events here. So I'm going to say a few words, and then our dean, the dean of the College of Media, Tracy Sulkin, will say a few words, and then Angela Aguayo, professor in the Media and Cinema Studies, is going to introduce our speaker, Patricia Aufderheide. But first I want to encourage you all to come back for more events this semester and next. So on November 7th, we're going to be screening the documentary Pumping Iron, introduced by Casey Ryan Kelly, a professor of rhetoric and public culture at the University of Nebraska. It's a super interesting documentary, so please come out for that. November 14th, we'll be screening Alien Romulus, yes, the one that was just in theaters. And on December 5th, just in time for finals, we'll be screening Gremlins, ostensibly a Christmas movie, introduced by faculty from Media and Cinema Studies, John Knipp. And so there'll be more to come in spring semester. So please welcome the Dean of the College of Media, Tracy Sulkin.
Thanks so much, Julie, and it's a pleasure to be here with all of you here today, and also those of us who are joining from Zoom, which is a large number, I understand. And it's just so exciting to be here at our third Ebert lecture. And the Roger Ebert Center for Film Studies, as many of you know, is a longstanding dream for Roger and Chaz Ebert and for our colleagues in the College of Media, especially the Department of Media and Cinema Studies. And when we were talking to folks about what the center's activities would look like, one of the centerpieces of that was going to be this Ebert lecture, which was going to be an opportunity to bring scholars and practitioners to campus to really talk about that intersection between film studies as a scholarly discipline and practice as well. And so it's really difficult to imagine a topic and a set of guests that would more closely meet that goal than the ones we have here today. So we're really excited for what will happen over the next hour, and then the conversations that this will undoubtedly spawn over the weeks and months to come. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce Professor Angela Aguayo, Associate Professor in the Department of Media and Cinema Studies, who's going to introduce our guests and get things rolling.
Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us this afternoon to talk about one of the most pressing issues of our time, the role of documentary in the struggle for democracy. There's a lot of ways to enjoy your Friday afternoon, so thank you for being here and helping us celebrate the Roger Ebert Center for Film Studies Ebert Lecture. We had a fascinating and timely screening for you last night. One of the longest running documentary production organizations in the country was born in Chicago and continues to thrive while producing some of the most important films of our time. In the Kartemquin Films' 6 decades of documentary film production, its storytelling about working people and their struggles for dignity stand out over time. In a field where the terms of work and the movements to organize labor are rare subjects, Kartemquin has tackled the big questions with the focus on the Midwest. This screening showcased 2 very different moments in the evolution of documentary storytelling. Made at a moment of industrial crisis in 1983, the last Pullman car charted the co-formation and co-collapse of an industry and a union and reached a nationwide audience on public TV. Its sharp analysis and vivid history are all the more relevant today. The 2015 series, Hard Earned, follows 5 families all trying to thrive on survival wages. Shown on the short-lived Al Jazeera American cable channel, it drew Kartemquin's longest tradition of cinema verite to give viewers an inside look on the daily life among the fifth of Americans who work all day to make too little for basic needs. We have 2 important guests with us this afternoon. They will take us on the journey to understand the intersection of documentary and democracy over the last 40 years. First, we have Gordon Quinn. Maybe you can say hi to everybody. is the founder of the senior advisor of Kartemquin Films. He was an executive producer of the Oscar-nominated documentaries Edith and Eddie, Abacus, and Minding the Gap. Some of Quinn's other documentary credits include The Last Pullman Car, Hoop Dreams, Stevie, Refrigerator Moms, and The New Americans. Recently, he directed For the Left Hand, Prisoner of Her Past, and A Good Man, and 63 Boycott, the latter of which was shortlisted for their Oscar nomination. Joining him is our guest speaker for this afternoon's lecture, Professor Patricia Aufderheide, University Professor of Communication Studies in the School of Communication at American University in Washington, D.C. She founded the school's Center for Media and Social Impact, where she continues as a senior research fellow. Her new book, Kartemquin Films, Documentaries on the Frontlines of Democracy, which you can purchase outside for $20, was published by the University of California Press, and it is an amazing history of the documentary filmmaking landscape in the Midwest. It is a compelling portrait of the kind of production culture grown in our region. And she's also the author of several other titles, including Documentary Film, a very short introduction by Oxford University Press, The Daily Planet, and The Communication Policy in Public Interest, as well as co-authoring Reclaiming Fair Use, How to Put Balance Back into Copyright. She has been a Fulbright Research Fellow 3 times, has served as a juror of Sundance Film Festival, among others, and Aufderheide has received numerous journalism and scholarly awards, including the George Stoney Award for Service to Documentary from the University Film and Video Association, and the International Communication Award for Agent of Change Award. These are just a few of many of her awards. On a personal note, Professor Aufderheide is the kind of culture creator and world maker that moves the needle on changing our social structures. She takes her thinking seriously by putting it on the ground and connecting it with various industries, organizations, and institutions. She is kind, generous, and invested in building networks that will live for generations. I would like to welcome Professor Patricia Aufderheide, the honored speaker of the 2024 Roger Ebert Lecture.
Well, I want to thank Angela Aguayo and Julie Turnock for this incredible honor and this opportunity to talk to you. And just to let you know, what's going to be circulated through the audience now is a card that lets you get 30% off the book, which will be less than what I'm selling it for out in the lobby. But I mean, it will cost you more than what I'm selling it for in the lobby. But it might be easier for you to do that. The other thing is my business card, so that you have a way of contacting me, because I hope that everybody here is able to take away something that allows you to engage with these issues, and I would love to hear about that. As Angela said, one of the things that matters greatly to me is that we build community around these ideas of strengthening democracy. So I want to thank you very much to the Roger Ebert Center. And I also want to say that Roger Ebert himself meant a lot to me. Roger Ebert and I worked in the same city and went to all the same screenings of the movies in the very old days before there were videotapes or VCRs or DVDs or streaming. And he was the big deal film reviewer for a major daily. And I was the pipsqueak film reviewer who had just come to town and was writing for the Democratic Socialist newspaper called In These Times. And Roger would sometimes say, you know, I saw a film and I didn't love it, but I think it has an audience. And I think you might you might appreciate the film and understand its audience better than me. Would you like to review it? And that was one example of Roger's generosity and his kindness. And it was a kindness toward the film. It was a kindness towards the audience, and it was a kindness toward a junior member of his tribe. So I just want to say that that really makes it very special for me to be here with you today. So let's talk about Kartemquin, which is the next slide. Here, Kartemquin is, how many people here before this knew the name Kartemquin? Okay, the people who raised their hands, you are very unusual people. Most people do not know the name of Kartemquin. They do know the names of some of the films. Can we get the next slide? Maybe not. Okay, so some of the names of those films are Hoop Dreams, which won a documentary award at Sundance and blew the lid off every record for sales of documentary films. And Minding the Gap, which went to the Oscars a few years ago. Unapologetic, which was a very exciting film, finished during the pandemic about racial reckoning and Black women in Chicago, and many, many more. So I'd like now to see whether we can give up on slide 2 and move to the first video, because this is a compilation video that's going to give you the big overview, just going to give you a flavor of Kartemquin Films. How's that looking?
Would you listen to me? Just relax a minute.
Our films don't start with once upon a time. Something's happening right now.
We want quality in education. That's the main reason why we're marching today.
This is not about a failure of communication. This is about an analysis of a whole system.
We're trying to show them, that we got power. Show them that we got a voice. Who's gonna do that? The people, us.
So don't ask me where's Joe, 'cause boy, you know he'll be out there on that picket line, yes sir. He'll be out there on that picket line, defending his right to strike on that picket line.
We made films that we thought an audience needed to see.
The maternity center being closed out, what we gonna do?
Yeah. The choice should be there for a woman if she wants her baby born in a hospital or if she wants her baby born at home.
What's his name?
Dwayne Pierre.
We would tell stories from the street level.
Hold it like that, a little lower down.
We're working a little experiment with film and asking questions and then kind of just talking on the street. Would you like to be a part of it?
Sure, why not?
First question's easy. Are you happy?
Groovy.
Just woke up. It's the first day of senior year and I have to get ready.
One of the things that's at the heart of what Kartemquin is about is the sort of deep humanity and understanding people in a more complex way than simply as symbols of some social issue.
I'm scared to be crippled. That's my whole problem. I don't want to be crippled. I don't want people to see me as crippled. That's it. That's the fucking bottom line.
Kana birokwa. Kimu kama ya mwe kumunika oyimba pira. Mwe kumunika oyimba pira. Natuye kuye wo yipuka ngoma ire umuyo kurua. Natuye kuchebere yipuka ngoma ire umuyo kurua mana munyetero yimba pira. Pira kwa manguna hika mo uko yimba pira ndire ku yimba pira ndire jawani hega jawani.
You have to find a way to like your characters, to care about them.
Your relationship has to be one where there is an underlying respect.
You think you can handle it?
Probably not. Don't know yet.
It takes a village to make a film. It takes all that time, it takes all that expertise, because people are very passionate about the films they make here.
What better a place to bring your projects that you take risks on or don't know how to do, but there's a story that you can't ignore.
Kartemquin is a community, and it's a community that I think is expanding with intention. So it's created all of these new programs with the specific aim of developing storytellers.
We want to help new people, new voices, find ways to get their stories out and step into the arena.
We also see ourselves as media activists.
I'm making films now, I'm making films today, so I can't wait for the law to change. We as a community have something that we can do right now to stand up and say we're going to assert our rights.
Experts say women care to a greater degree than men about issues of war and peace, the poor, and equality.
Fair use is saying, I have to be able to critique, to be able to parody, to put things in historical context.
How many women vote for a male candidate because they find him attractive?
What we need to do is organize. We did it first for documentaries, but now it's spreading everywhere.
Kartemquin's always been a political place, but now it's a much more powerful form of advocacy for filmmaking itself.
We understand the importance of media in the democratic society, and you have to fight to create that space.
Society does not censor you until it really thinks you're dangerous. We have not been considered sufficiently dangerous.
I'm Michael Zansky from Local 1010. I'm not about to be scared by a movie, and along with many of you, I saw through this propaganda.
I'm asking you if you apologize for the unpatriotic remarks that you made.
I'm not apologizing for nothing like that because I don't have to.
Kartemquin films, whether they're done last week or 20 years ago, still have that same basic honesty.
It's saying, like, you know how life repeats itself as a cycle. You just be one of the persons that's telling the story. I'm trying to be one of the ones telling the story.
And until we meet again, and rain falls softly upon your head.
I love it. Damn felon
I don't know what it is about Stevie that I love, but I just love him.
It's been 6 years since I seen my dad.
What do the doctors say?
It is likely I will have passed when the film is ready. I consider my remaining days to be like money in the bank. When it is all gone, I will be repossessed.
The Bible says the last enemy to be defeated is death. I read that when I was a kid, and it stuck with me forever.
I really didn't know whether you'd heard or not, but she's not with us anymore.
Oh, did she pass away?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, the poor thing.
Dude, no fucking way. I think he just fucking found it. He finally fucking found it.
After 50 years of filmmaking,
Starting 50
years back.
In the future. After 50 years,
50 years, and we're still here.
we are just getting started.
Something about Kartemquin just refuses to go away.
I'm here and I'm showing the world that you can be here and still free and stay yourself and get respect from the world.
You have to fight me to put me down. Because I'm not just going to let you say, well, you're nobody. Because I'm going to tell you I'm somebody.
Okay, so here we are at a university and you're word people. What are some adjectives or nouns that came up for you? I'll repeat them for our Zoom audience in those 9 minutes. Emotional. Great. Humanity. I'm sorry? Honest. Inspiring. Anybody else got an adjective that these people didn't think of yet? Yeah. Sad. Personal. Ooh, yeah. Equality. Okay. Can you yell it a little more? Intimate. Great.
I had this discussion with a colleague recently. What's the opposite of entertaining?
What is the opposite of entertaining?
Right. I'm asking, it's a rhetorical question. It's like, is it anti-entertainment? Is it, what is entertainment that is expository? Not necessarily. I mean, to some people it's entertaining, and this was in a fundraising environment where people that were donors felt that it was necessary to be entertained, no matter what the content was. Anyway, that's all I'm going to say. It starts to sound.
So are you drawing a distinction between sensationalistic or voyeuristic or just exploitative and being meaningful? Or?
That's a lot of stuff with
okay.
The word entertainment and discuss.
We might have to come back to her. Okay, no, challenge accepted. Okay, other words? Those were great words, yes? Groundbreaking. Ooh. Okay, you know what I love about this is it's a mixture. You've got words that are a mixture of, it's about people, it's about a story, it's about a person, it's intimate, it's emotional, and then there are bigger words like equality and humanity, and this is, I think, the excitement about Kartemquin as not only as a historical fact of almost 6 decades in the Midwest and in the nation, but also as a model for how we can make media that is not merely entertaining, but that is also compelling. And that certainly was what happened to me when I first, now I've got double mics. When I first met the people at Kartemquin and made my best friend here, Gordon Quinn. Here's the reason why around half of you have never heard of Kartemquin. And really, if there's somebody who should have heard of it, it's probably the people in this room. It has existed for almost 6 decades without, realistically speaking, a viable business model. It shouldn't exist. But it does. And the reason why it exists, why it persists, why it has been able to achieve, is something that I want to talk about today. I want to talk about a big idea And then I want to talk about how that idea evolved. So if we could get the next slide. When Kartemquin was founded in 1966 by 3 guys, and that name Kartemquin, that's part of the names of all 3 guys. That's Quinn, right there. So, what? A bad idea. Okay, yes. Not going to argue. But the people who founded it actually founded it with a big idea. And it was an idea that had never been tested in media. And what they were all graduates of the University of Chicago, a place where people just grow big ideas. And they had studied the work of John Dewey. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that. But John Dewey was a philosopher who talked about democracy and how the real guts of democracy are in the ability of ordinary people to understand that they have agency to act about the problems that they face, which is kind of what you were watching people do for those 9 minutes. So he was talking about that. At the same time that they're learning about John Dewey, they are watching the most amazing, mind-blowing films that are now classics. You see these films in film history courses. You've probably seen clips of them passing through a lecture. And it's the origins of what we now call cinema verite, meaning experiential cinema that really puts you down in the middle of some kind of action, just as Gordon Quinn said in that 9-minute clip reel that you saw. It puts you down in the middle of action and puts you in the shoes of the people who are living that story. And we can go back to that earlier slide for a second, sorry. What they saw was the power of art to be able to infuse democracy. And I put a quote from John Dewey here because it became, you just never saw a proposal or a pitch by Kartemquin that didn't have this quote in it. The real work of art is the building up of an integral experience out of the interaction of organic and environmental conditions of energies. You know, the problem with John Dewey is he needed somebody to make a movie about his ideas because he wasn't that great a writer. So they thought there was a natural link between the notion of accountable democracy and films. Let me explain to you why that link seemed so natural. And we're still going to stick with this slide for a minute. So John Dewey makes an argument about democracy that actually, once you've heard it, you're like, well, duh. But until you've been walked through it, you're like, well, is that really true? So John Dewey argues that democracy is about keeping power accountable. It's about holding power to account, wherever that power may come from. And it can come from a lot of places. But wherever it comes from, democracy gives people who experience problems as the result of unaccountable power the right to organize to put pressure on those systems of power. Not only through elections, although I hope everybody here is registered and is going to vote, right? Thank you. But not just through elections, but through the process of finding other people who are also affected by the same problems, sharing what they have in common, no matter what else they don't have in common, and coming to an understanding of where they can put pressure to be able to improve that situation, to make it more just, more equitable, and to limit abuse of power. When you have that notion of what democracy means, what you've done is to put communication at the very center of the process. Because it's that ability of people to say, I think I see a problem, and have the confidence that they can find other people who share that problem, work with them, articulate a shared understanding of that problem, and then find the people to put pressure on. That is a communication issue. And so John Dewey believes that communication is the circulatory system of democracy. And what, now we can go to the next slide. That's where documentary comes in. So on the left, you see a couple of documentaries that if you studied film history, these are probably the films people talked about and said, oh, that was the origin of cinema verite. I'm not going to tell you about that today. I'm just going to point out that that's the era and that's the kinds of movies that they were watching. What's also going on at the same time is a reckoning moment in society where all kinds of social groups are rising up and demanding justice from unaccountable power. Now, there are anti-war groups coming together on campuses to argue against the Vietnam War, driven really overwhelmingly by the fact that the draft was universal. They were building on the shoulders of the giants of the civil rights movement. There were feminist demands. There were groups such as the Black Panthers, the Young Lords, rising up angry. These are groups that were organizing around ethnic lines to say we are part of what Fred Hampton called a rainbow coalition of groups that whatever their cultural attachments and communities were, shared a common understanding that they were part of what Graeber would now call the 99%, if he were still around. And I really want you to read David Graeber too. So telling stories about people, America's working poor, and America's disenfranchised, that if you could tell those stories, it wouldn't just be a story that was an intimate, personal story where you could feel for that person, although probably that too. It was also a way of looking at historic and current inequities and unaccountable power exhibiting itself on the bodies and lives of ordinary people. So they actually went to college with another guy who believed the exact same thing, and that was Bernie Sanders, who these guys actually filmed in a demonstration when they were still in college. And by the way, in 2016, Bernie Sanders used that in a campaign ad. So cinema verite promises the way to tell stories that help people organize themselves. That's the vision. It's a vision that links democracy and documentary in a way that Netflix has never been behind. But Kartemquin has never surrendered that vision. And that vision has been a beacon. It has been a lighthouse. It has been a bat signal to so many people. Some of them were people who wanted their stories to be told. Some of them were people who were filmmakers who wanted to tell those kinds of stories. Some of them were people who just wanted to get a leg up in the industry and stumbled in the door and discovered a shared passion for this link between democracy and documentary. So let me take you back to the beginning of the founding of Kartemquin, because now I'm going to walk you through the epochs of Kartemquin. So what you see on this slide is pictures from different film collectives at the time. So there were film collectives all over the world. They were in Japan. They were in Paris. That's Jean-Luc Godard over there on the far left, upper left. They were in New York, newsreel. They were collectives telling stories that needed to be told about these movements for justice and reckoning. Among those collectives was what happened after only a few years of within only a few years of Kartemquin's founding, which was a bunch of people coming together and in the language of the time saying, hey, look at us. We all share a common vision. We must be a collective. So now we're a collective. The difference between these guys and the people you just saw is that they helped to build an enduring institution. They were not destroyed by factional infighting. They were not destroyed by sectarianism, the dogmatic beliefs that I'm right, and if you are wrong, you have to get thrown out of the group. But what they did believe in was democratic socialism. By the way, the same project that in these times was also, my newspaper was also founded on. And the project that Bernie Sanders has been promoting for all those years in the House, and that AOC is there to also support. So these people believed that the most important thing they could do, and they were actually taking their lead from Fred Hampton's advice here, was to make films with and for movements that they could reach. And not just one, but many black people said to them, don't make movies about black people. Make movies about white people, they're the problem. And they were like, we know some white people, we know the people from Rising Up Angry, which was a working class white group in Chicago. And they made some amazing films. I'm gonna show you a clip from, if we can go to slide 7, from Trick Bag. This is a still from Trick Bag. Trick Bag was kind of an amazing little movie. I wanna show you a clip of it. And it's a movie of working class kids talking about how race is a trick to deceive you from noticing the things you have in common with people who might be culturally or ethnically different from you. So let's watch a clip from Trick Bag.
I live here, and it's like on this side of 26th Street. And when somebody like Mexican moves in, you know, all the neighbors get together and spick down the block, you know? For real, that's what it's like over here. And
right away, my parents, you know, oh man, you know, all the Mexicans are moving, let's space, you know? So we moved down about, 10 blocks.
Half the block is owned by this one dude named D. And D, he kind of goes around and buys up all these buildings, and he ain't gonna rent to no black people, because the first thing he told us when we come around to look at the apartment was not to worry about the niggers, because he owns half the block.
the first apartment I moved in was out in Lyons, which is this suburban community out in southwest area. And I brought this black sister home from work with me, and we had planned to go see Jane Fonda in Maywood. And about 15 minutes after we got in the apartment, my landlord, who lived upstairs from me, called up and said that you've got a black girl down there, and I got 2 calls from the neighbors, and I want her out of there. And it just freaked me out, because she was a real good friend of mine, and so I decided, well, she's not going anywhere. So about a half an hour later, he calls back up, and he says, well, is she gone yet? And I says, no, she's not, and she's not leaving. And he just said, okay, you got 30 days to get out. And that was that.
So one of the things that, now that Kartemquin has an archive at Washington University of St. Louis, one of the things I'm excited about is the idea of historians going back to some of these films and the many, many outtakes and versions, and looking at the way people talk and what they dress like and what their expressions are, because I among other things, this is an incredible archive of regional cultures. So I'll give you one more example of the kinds of films that were made in the days of the collective. So Trick Bag was actually used with Rising Up Angry and to talk about racism as a real problem for young people who saw it as a trick to keep them from noticing fundamental issues of injustice. Another film that you saw some clips from is Chicago Maternity Center Story. This is one of the clips that you saw at the beginning of the introductory clip reel. This was a film that was made by women who were part of a women's liberation union in Chicago, working with people trying to keep a maternity center open. This was a medical service for home births. And Northwestern Hospital, which ran it, wanted to shut it down, basically eliminating that home birth option and driving everybody to the hospital. So this, I'll show you a clip from that. We're at Chicago Maternity Center story clip.
You're doing fine. Now just rest again. Just breathe in and out real easy.
The choice should be there for a woman if she wants her baby born in a hospital or if she wants it born at home.
Sit right on the edge. Have her take 3 breaths and push her.
At home, you're treated like an individual and you're the most important thing there.
The maternity center being closed out, what we gonna do?
Yeah.
For 78 years, over 100,000 women had been able to have home deliveries that were safer and 8 to 10 times cheaper than hospital deliveries. In 1972, construction began on an $18 million women's hospital. They promised that the maternity center would become part of the hospital.
Hospitals are a business. They're in there to meet expenses.
We're cutting out the delivery service, putting it very bluntly, because we don't want to go broke and end up in the bankruptcy court, and because there isn't apparently the demand for it.
Whether health care is delivered first class for the rich or second class for the poor, it all makes someone a profit.
He's 8.5 pounds.
That's why they thought she was having twins.
With the interest in home delivery increasing among all women, the Chicago Women's Liberation Union protests the announced closing of the Chicago Maternity Center.
Look at your grandmother. What do you think of that? Don't you think that's pretty nice?
When we started out, you guys gave me some words that were about people and intimacy and closeness, and also about systems and structure and power and injustice. The Chicago Maternity Center combined those. It took the story, it was a cinema verite story of one woman having her baby through the Chicago Maternity Center story. It was a story about the women who were organizing to keep it open. It was an organizing story, and it was an analysis of what happens when bottom line capitalism is the deciding factor in women's health. And it combined those three. So there you see democracy and documentary together, engaging and enabling disenfranchised communities and working with them in their process of getting voice. So that collective, at the end of the 70s, for a lot of reasons, read the book, falls apart. But nobody goes away really mad. They disperse. They start other things in their lives. They have families. They take other jobs. And what the group that remains is basically the founders, and they keep on focusing on the same mission, but now they're making films with unions, with about labor issues. And you saw 2 of those films last night. If we can go to slide 9. I'm not going to show you clips of those because if you didn't see them, you at least know what they are and you can look them up. And the focus here is, and if you ever get to slide, oh, great. Okay, an example of this is a film you didn't see, and it is part 1 of 2 stories about a chain factory. The second one becomes really famous in union circles because it's the only film we've got that goes inside a negotiating process between labor and management. Next slide. I think we should be at 10. These issues are critical, and this period of time when they're making labor films is also a time when the union movement is declining in power. For a lot of reasons. If you watched The Last Pullman Car, you know some of those reasons. But the experience of living through that decline in ability to organize was a truly terrible one for the people at Kartemquin. And it was profoundly dispiriting, and they were kind of wondering what was the next step for them. And I think something that was very, very dramatically a change, slide 11, is what enabled them to move to a character-driven, humanist, but systemically engaged set of film narrative practices in the process of making Hoop Dreams. Hoop Dreams was the film that really changed the business's mind about whether documentaries could make any money. Because this was a hugely popular film, it was hugely lucrative, and by the way, everybody who had a speaking role in the film got paid, even they're still getting paid today. But it really changed what America thought documentaries were. Most Americans thought documentaries, at the time that Hoop Dreams was made, most Americans thought documentaries were like that awful stuff they showed you in high school. And really, it was awful. Hoop Dreams was like, my God, that's a movie. You know, when I used to go to film festivals, and people would say, "Oh, well, did you see documentaries or did you see a movie?" And that was a movie. So this Hoop Dreams was a story about these two black kids in Chicago who were really great basketball players, sorry, not the sports person. And they had aspirations. They wanted to go pro. But like most people, they weren't going to go pro. The filmmakers filmed them as people who had aspirations to succeed in America, had this particular way to do it. And what were their obstacles? What were their challenges? And how were they supported, particularly by their families, as they went through their entire experience of school, from the beginnings of middle school through high school, and finally getting an opportunity to go to college. Hoop Dreams was regarded, it blew people away. And some people were like, well, did these people just tell pulling themselves up by their bootstraps kind of story about black kids being able to get ahead? And no, it was not an uplift story. And it was not a sentimental story. It was a story really about what it took against what kinds of obstacles even to get to the kind of success that they were able to get to, as opposed to what their dreams were. And the movie ends with a scene of one of the kids, somebody says to him, he's going off to college, he says, well, remember me when you're famous. And the kid turns around and he says to the other guy, you remember me when I'm not. And that resonates with all of us as we're leaving the theater, because that's the challenge. What about all those people who didn't get famous? And by this time, you're utterly invested in those kids and their families and the whole thing, and you're interested in their success in a way that you might never have imagined you would be at the time when you start the film. So we are now at the Hoop Dreams clip. I want to give you a little flavor of it.
I'm gonna miss you. I want you to be good, okay? And don't get mixed up in none of those stuff down there. You know, I done told you what to do. Get no alcohol, no wine coolers, none of this stuff. Okay? I just hope he stay in there. That's what worries me most. Once he get in the door, I want him to stay in there for 4 years. Think you gonna make it? I think he gonna make it. Oh, I hope so anyway.
So, thank you. That's great.
When I was young, when I was little,
I wanted to focus on that scene because that close focus on the mom's face when she says, is he gonna make it? He's got 4 years, and she's already listed all the things she's worried about when she says goodbye to him. She says, do you think he's gonna make it? She's saying that to the filmmakers. She is looking to them to provide her with some comfort. Difficult moment, and also she knows the way he does not everything that is in front of him. And she knows that he has to make it through those 4 years. And so we know that this is just the beginning of the story of his challenges, and that she knows that too. So to me, that's just such a, it's a moment about, yes, it's very emotional about the individuals, but it deliberately doesn't let us resolve into, oh, look at them, off to college, everything's fine. And in this, if you watched Hard Earned last night, you saw the same thing. It almost ends with this wedding that's just, you know, people are crying and it's just great. And it doesn't let you end there. It goes directly to another scene where a woman is still trying to find a job. So of course, well, Hoop Dreams blows the lid off of any expectations Kartemquin ever had, and any expectations anybody ever had of Kartemquin. And so suddenly, for the first time in Kartemquin's history, this is a group of people in a, excuse me, fairly grungy building. I'm one of the people who did not love the Kartemquin building. A lot of people have very fond memories of it. And they've been making these tough, deliberately challenging movies about big social issues. And suddenly, like, Sheila Nevin's HBO, fancy people are knocking down the door saying, can we have a meeting with you? And what everybody wants is, what do you think they want? They want the sequel. Who said that? Brilliant. Thank you. Yes, they wanted Hoop Dreams 2. Yes, exactly. They did not get Hoop Dreams 2. And Kartemquin did not get rich. Because people who were at Kartemquin were not really interested in Hoop Dreams 2 or Hoop Dreams, the exploitative version. They still wanted to tell the same stories. In fact, Steve James, his next project was about as unfundable a film as you could possibly imagine. And I think, let's see, let's go to slide 12. Oh, slide 13. Oh yeah, okay, oh, I forgot about slide 12. This is the Kartemquin bathroom in the crummy building that they finally moved away from. And they had, I think this is moving to the new building, See that framed cartoon? This is how big Hoop Dreams was. That framed cartoon is a picture from, it is a cartoon from the New Yorker. Very classy magazine. Once you have a cartoon made about you in the New Yorker, you have become national news. And the picture is the Oscar statue. Can you see the Oscar statuette in the middle? And then there's a little guy throwing a basketball, and it's going over the top. It's missing the Oscar. So this is a visual representation of the fact that Hoop Dreams, in spite of spectacular success, was not nominated for an Oscar documentary award. And everybody was scandalized. By the way, Roger Ebert, really, really important in the general history of Kartemquin, but also in making Hoop Dreams a success, because he and Siskel picked out Hoop Dreams before it went to Sundance and said, you gotta pay attention to this movie. So that's how big Hoop Dreams was. That's why Sheila Nevins was like, hi, guys. Okay, next slide. Okay, that's not what they made. That film on the left, you saw a few clips from this when we started out this adventure this afternoon. That's the film Stevie is about a guy, a working class guy in southern Illinois, near Carbondale, who had been a little brother. Steve James had been, the director of Hoop Dreams, had been a big brother to this kid, who was a very troubled teen and then turned into a troubled adult. And Steve James wanted in a film to explore the ethics of his own relationship as a middle-class kid with this working-class kid, and what the nature of that relationship, the big brother, little brother relationship was. In the middle of this, Stevie is arrested for molesting his niece. Anybody else would be like, and that's not the movie we're gonna make anymore. And the Kartemquin people kept making the film. And it is now one of the classics of documentary canons. It's a magnificent film, but nobody wanted to fund that movie. Nobody. More examples of the unfundable but still made films. Refrigerator Mothers. Refrigerator Mothers is a film that was brought to Kartemquin by a woman who had an autistic child and was horrified to learn that generations of mothers of our autistic children had been blamed for their children's autism because they were, quote, refrigerator mothers. They were cold and unfeeling toward their children. A terrible, bad psychological and medical piece of misinformation that was really very influential. And so this is an exploration of that bad idea and the way it changed and ruined lives. And finally, on the right, another great unfundable movie that actually got made by Maria Finizzo. This is about the struggle to get stem cell research done against the pressure to not use stem cells because, why? Because they are embryo cells. They come from abortions. Yes, I knew that once. Okay, anyway, so Terra Incognita is about a scientist who's exploring these issues. His daughter is paralyzed. And so he wants to solve this problem for his daughter, but he also has a scientific adventure to go on. Again, I mean, how unconvincing an elevator pitch is that? The movie is truly compelling and, of course, won awards. So these are 3 examples of movies that are successfully made by people who were determined to make those stories that had communities of interest behind them. That were used a character-driven format to tell bigger issues that are important in a democracy. And in some cases, particularly Refrigerator Mothers, it is directly related to a movement to support mothers of autistic children and disabled caregivers generally. They also developed, out of this experience, a huge project funded by public television and the MacArthur Foundation. And that is a series on immigration called The New Americans, which I wish they would run again because we really need to hear these stories. This is about what people go through when they immigrate to the United States, and it starts out when they are still at home in their community of origin, still important, still familiar, still without all of the trauma that comes from the dislocation. And I'm going to show you a clip from the New Americans that is about the Mexican family. And this Mexican family, there's a little boy. He's elementary school, and you're going to watch the last day, his last day in elementary school in Mexico before he leaves. So could we watch that clip, The New Americans? Pedrito. They will see.
Él estuvo aquí con ustedes, ¿verdad? Pero ustedes estaban de primero y él iba de segundo. Ya se fue a despedir de sus compañeros y él ya se va a Estados Unidos, se va con toda su familia y se viene a despedir. Y se fijan que está triste, ¿verdad? Porque ya se va. Porque él estuvo muy a gusto aquí con nosotros. ¿Y si tienes ganas de irte? No. ¿No tienes ganas de irte? Pero ya cuando estés allá te va a gustar. Ahorita dices no tengo ganas de irme porque no conoces.
Muchas gracias, maestra, porque usted me enseñó a escribir y a saber una letra.
Ay, Pedrito, ya. Ya,
Muchas gracias, maestra.
Ya, mijito, de nada, ¿eh?
Adiós.
Sí, mijito. Pues ya también me hiciste llorar a mí, mijito, que te vaya muy bien.
Espero que nos vuelvamos a ver, maestra.
Sí, hijo, a ver cuánto vuelves, ¿eh? Ahora cuando estés bien grandote vas a volver, ya no te voy a conocer. Ándale, pues, que te vaya bien, mijito. A ver, vamos a darle un aplauso a Pedrito porque ya se va. Dígale que le vaya bien. Dígale que le vaya bien, Pedrito.
Okay. So I really wanted you to see that because that is such an emotional moment, and it's an individual moment, but it's also a moment about what it means to be an immigrant more generally. And the New Americans not only had a huge success on public broadcasting, but it also developed modules that were used to help educate social workers and policymakers around, this is back in the 90s, around immigration. And so it was extremely successful at the time. Oh gosh, I'd love to see it again. So I'm going to skip Minding the Gap, which is a newer film, and I'm sure you will not have any trouble finding it on Hulu, but Minding the Gap is a story about Rockford, Illinois, and about skateboarders who are having trouble growing up. The reason why I want, thank you, as Kartemquin develops, it develops these programs that come out of its revamped post-founder syndrome organizing money coming from the MacArthur Foundation. We could go to the next slide. And they develop programs like this one, Diverse Voices in Documentary, that cultivate people like the people in this picture who are all working either to help somebody make a story that they can tell about themselves and their lives, or they are that person. And Minding the Gap, a film by Bing Liu, comes out of this project. So this is an extension of that democracy and documentary promise of making films with and for people telling their own stories. There's one more way in which democracy and documentary are united in the history of Kartemquin that I really want to leave you with, because this is really important no matter what you are going to do. If you never make a film, if you never write a journalistic article, you still have this question of where am I part of a public? Where am I participating in my own society with agency to be able to check on accountable power? Well, as filmmakers, Kartemquinites all understood, and especially Gordon had this real vision. They understood that they themselves were members of a public of people who make media. And they looked for ways to make change to increase the opportunities for the least favored people to be able to tell more stories. So part of this was working to get public access into Chicago, which Kartemquin was part of. Part of this was working with Community Film Workshop, which was training Black people to make films and developing projects with them. Part of this was working to expand the opportunities to get funding for documentary filmmakers inside public broadcasting. And if we can go to the next slide. So these areas of, there's a third area. I've talked about public broadcasting, I've talked about community video. The third area of importance in terms of making a difference as a citizen of your own community of media makers was in fair use. Fair use is the right to quote copyrighted material without paying for it under some circumstances. It's not hard to use if you know how to use it. Filmmakers didn't know how to use it, and because of work that I was able to do with our law school at American University, we were able to work with filmmakers so that they established their own best practices code of fair use. And this is where I want you to go to that website that is CMS Impact/documentary. This is a website. There we are. So this code, everybody who is involved in making anything should know about this. This would have been a piece of paper if it hadn't been for Gordon Quinn and Kartemquin Films becoming the leaders in documentary filmmakers saying, we don't think this is weird, we think that this is right. And the reason they thought it was right is because they thought they had rights that were not being used appropriately, and they wanted to use their rights. They saw it as an issue of freedom of speech in a democracy. They also did, in terms of public broadcasting, can we go to the ITVS website? Kartemquin was actively involved in the 10-year process to create the largest funder for social issue documentary films in America, itvs.org. And if it weren't for those 10 years of work that they put in, it wouldn't exist today. And then finally, we have one more site, which is cmsimpact.org/democracy. There we go. This is a story, this is a report that argues, and the same argument that Kartemquin made to me when I was a newspaper editor and that I was moved by, which is that documentarians are important to public broadcasting and to American publics because they tell stories that help us have more agency and engagement in a democracy. So that was the 1966 mission. And it's a mission that has in many different forms, whether it was a collective or a module for social workers or a character-driven documentary that made a shit ton of money. That link between democracy and documentary was always what kept them going. That was the mission of 1966, that's the mission today, and that's the mission that inspired me to write that book that's out there, and why I don't feel shy about telling you that you should read it too. Thank you. Gordon has been incredibly patient. God knows what he really thinks of my interpretation of his own history, but he's here to answer your questions. The Fairness Doctrine was a broadcast rule that news had to be balanced. And it was abolished by the Reagan FCC in, I think, 1982. It was not abolished, it was suspended, but that basically meant it was gone. And it had no effect on, expanding the ability of news to be more balanced, to be more, to have more freedom of speech, which was the argument for the broadcasters for getting rid of it. It didn't do that. It did encourage shock jocks, which originally were terrible. But I think that what encouraged the shock jocks turned into that right-wing movement of Rush Limbaugh and what's his name, Joe Rogan, and all those people. The Fairness Doctrine would never have applied to documentaries. What I think really did make even a much bigger difference than the Fairness Doctrine in the Reagan years was something called the 3-year holding rule, and that was something that said you can't sell a broadcast station for 3 years after you buy it. And that meant that if you had to hang on to it for 3 years, you had to invest in providing responsible programming. And when they got rid of that rule, then shock jocks became the way of inflating the price of stations to flip them. But again, this was not, that was, all of these deregulatory moves affected news and broadcasting, and they would not have directly affected documentary. But I do love the chance to talk about the 3-year holding rule.
Yeah, and the paved the way for some of the media consolidation, like you were talking about. But
right. The Reagan administration got rid of rules that made it impossible to buy. Previously, it had been impossible to buy a radio station and a newspaper in the same city. That they got rid of that, and then in 1996 they went wild and did other things that we won't go into.
One of the things that's happening now, though, that you know, we'll see how this plays out. It's just at the beginning. The idea of fact-checking has become politicized. I mean, how do you politicize fact-checking? And yet it's becoming politicized, and it's a core journalistic value. It's a core value when we make documentaries. So I'm just noticing that beginning, and I'm not sure where it's going to wind up. But it's very, very strange that people have focused in on that and said, well, fact-checking is somehow political.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that was true of documentaries for a very long time is because they weren't very lucrative. Mostly it was liberals and leftists who were interested in the medium. That is no longer true. The conservatives are and the far right are very, very eagerly making documentaries and releasing them on YouTube. And stuff like Plandemic had, which was misinformation about COVID, had a huge effect on misinformation because of the stature and the belief of the American public that documentaries are very trustworthy. So the right wing and the disinformation people have rushed into that space. And of course, so have highly exploitative filmmakers like, you know, the people who made Tiger King. And those are now being, you know, a direct threat to the public's trust in films like Kartemquin's.
Other questions?
Thank you so much for this amazing presentation. Something that's struck me is that when you look at film cultures on the West Coast and East Coast, you see this kind of weird collision between counterculture and art culture. And when you look at this and how this grows up in Chicago, it looks very different. There's a very much ingrained commitment to working people's struggles, labor, this kind of, and I'm just curious, why do you think that unique profile emerged in Chicago and in the Midwest?
Well, I mean, regionalism is important. And I've always felt that regional filmmaking was important. When we started Kartemquin, we were in Chicago, and we looked around, and like the money was on, you know, documentary filmmaking was in Boston, New York, Los Angeles, and beginning in San Francisco. And we, at one point, were thinking, well, that's where we need to go. But we said, no, we're Midwesterners. We're going to stay here and be here. And so we were influenced by that culture in Chicago. I know other organizations that went through bitter divides and splits because of what was happening politically within the movement. Not that we didn't have that in Chicago too, but there was a certain kind of collegiality to the different organizations in Chicago. We were all supporting each other, trying to help each other. We did have a situation where the Women's Liberation Union went through a terrible sectarian split. We had the leaders of both factions in Kartemquin. We survived and the Women's Liberation Union did not. But I think that that thing that Pat was talking about, which is that commitment to these core values of democracy and the role of what we are doing can play in a democracy, also changed a little bit the way we were and the way we kind of dealt with other institutions and organizations. So we weren't like, we are the revolutionary. Even though at one point we were reading Mao's Little Red Book collectively, we weren't saying we are the revolutionary vanguard. We were saying, how do we play a role in this democracy and fix all the things that are wrong without getting rid of the democracy itself?
I'm a little older than the most of you here, but I was in Chicago in the late 60s, and I can attest that it was a social political pressure cooker in terms of the Democratic convention that was held there. Mayor Daley trying his best, but he just was not of the right generation to make things successful. The elder Mayor Daley, and ended up, unfortunately, you know, history is probably not going to be too good for him. But anyway, many of you maybe know Professor James Barrett in the history department here, who is very much into telling the little story. Blow this one out? Okay, of how they make the little stories tell the big story, the wider sweeps of history. And I think of that little boy in the clip that you made there, how well he was dressed, that his parents or somebody at home saw that he was going to go to school in nice clothes and hoping that, that might make a difference. But it didn't. And as he walks out that door, the institutions are failing him. And he has all the backing that we say you're supposed to give kids when they be successful in school. He's had that. And still we failed him. And we went to an uncertain future. Thank you.
Yeah, those details are, in a sense, what we make our films out of. And in that scene, you picked up on something that I did never quite, it was in the back, but I never noticed the way he's dressed. And that's exactly what I think is so important about documentary and verite documentary. When you're filming real life, there's all this complexity of detail in the image and in the quality of the picture that someone can pick up on something like what you just saw there. The thing that always struck me is that this is a rural school. When you see the film, you know this is in the middle of nowhere, a very poor area, and people are leaving because they can no longer survive there. They can't, there's no way that they can even feed their families. And yet, that's a good school, and that's a good teacher. And that's the kind of stereotype that a scene like that can work against, kind of, people see that and it's like, oh, she's a good teacher. He's leaving something of value behind. And that's one of the core things that people don't understand about immigration. Very few people actually really want to emigrate. They have to, and they give up a lot to come. Yeah. Have you got, behind you, the microphone?
Because we were watching the movie that you made several decades ago last night, The Last Pullman Car, and I think the person who asked before, what's the opposite of entertainment, and Patricia said the word compelling, and maybe that's the word, because I found the film very, very compelling, and I'm wondering, how do I say, what was your kind of purpose
Well, for the first part of that, we started making it for the workers who were trying to save their jobs. And they said, our story needs to be told. And so we started making this film. And we saw that the movement was going to fail. The plant was going to be closed, and their jobs were not going to be saved. And so we felt compelled to put that in a historical and social context. We wound up telling the story of the rise of monopoly capital and the rise of industrial unions, all based on Pullman. That's another thing we look for, where we want to deal with big ideas, but we want to deal with big ideas embedded in a concrete story that comes out of a community. So that local 1834 was, this historic local that dated all the way back to Debs. And we're looking at the rise of conglomerates through what happened to this one particular corporation, the Pullman company. And in a sense, our audience for the film when we were making it was all the other people who were going to be involved in struggles like this. If people are going to get involved in a struggle, we felt it was important to give them the tools to understand what they're up against and the larger historical forces and that kind of thing. Eventually, the film was shown on public television and reached a much wider audience. And in that sense, very often, in the sense that Pat talked about, we were making a film we would be thinking about, well, who's the public for these films? Where are people coming together? Or how can the film itself help people come together to actually get in the room, to have a meeting, to be in face-to-face communication, which was very important to Dewey. So that was one kind of thing that we thought about. But as things began to broaden out, I began to think about different audiences. And so you have the broad audience that a broadcast gives you, and you're reaching, hundreds or millions of people at home, some of them in their Barca lounge or whatever, but they're all seeing this story about people coming together to fight for something. We did films, and we showed films in people's living rooms. There was a period where we were hooking up with Where's Joe, which a couple clips of you saw the guy saying, "I'm not going to let a movie scare me." And that was from a film we made for the steelworkers when they were trying to give up, the company was trying to get them to give up the right to strike, and made a corporate video to kind of scare workers. And we made a film on half-inch video for these rank-and-file union groups that were fighting that. And it was, coming from film, I was appalled. It's like we're editing in the camera sometimes. It's very, very crude medium. We were taking it into people's homes and hooking it up to their big old wooden consoles in the living room. And they were like, "Whoa, we're on TV." No, you're not on TV. That's just in your living room. We had to explain, this is before the VCR, we had to explain to people. We were taking it to bars. But those people were riveted to this 40-minute film, which I thought was so boring, because they were going to make decisions based on what they were seeing in that movie. And that's a different kind of audience. That's an audience that can also stand up to the hundreds or thousands of millions in that broad audience. And both are important. But I think for the kind of films we make, I'm always thinking about both kinds of audiences. The people who are singing in a room together, it's going to affect their lives, or they're going to make decisions based on what they see in the movie, or it's going to inform them about strategies to take in their activism, and also the broader audience that we reach with a film like Hoop Dreams, who may have never, one of the things that was so great about Hoop Dreams was a 3-hour film, which we were told to never admit to by the distributors, with no stars, about African-American families and African-American boys. And people watched Hoop Dreams who would never watch a documentary about inner-city families. That would have been an anathema to them, but they watched Hoop Dreams, and they had emotions. And that's what I look for on that broader level.
What is the movie The Informant like? Is it a documentary, or is it a documentary-like film?
It is a docudrama.
Is it docudrama?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's actually based on real life, but it's got famous actors, and it's a script.
Okay, so that's a different genre completely.
It is a different genre, and we want to stick up for the difference, because we think it's really important to maintain.
Come on, Pat, come over here. Pat, come over here.
Oh, sorry.
You can come over here.
Just, you know what I said. Just say that. Just say what you would
Yeah,
say.
go ahead.
I
You
just stole
say-
that from him.
Yeah, but go ahead and say it, because I forgot what you said already. You say it.
But I said it's important to distinguish a docudrama from a documentary. Docudramas are based on something that's true, but they are scripted. They are cast. They diverge from what happened. And what a documentary, it's great. The great claim of documentary that makes it a distinctive genre is there's making a claim for telling you in good faith, honestly, about something that really happened. Now, you might be doing that with animation, but you're still making that claim and saying, this is all embroidered what really happened.
I asked because in The Informant, of course, is based in this part of the country, Macon County. And The Informant references a fairly significant topic that was about trafficking of young children during the time of the price fixing and the rest, and there's a line in the film. It's as though they dropped it in because someone knew that had been happening, and the line, of course, is, how did you get those really smart, international bankers to do business with these dumb Central Illinois farmers? And the answer, of course, Matt Damon's character says, little girl's underwear. And that just kind of goes on in the film without any further attention, but the fact is that's true. And that is an untold story within that story, and it's curious as to why that was put in there at a time when human trafficking and child trafficking and the right and the left have different ideas about how to save the children and all the rest of it. But it was almost like you could do a prequel or something. I mean, what do you do with something like that?
So I think it's a great genre, and it's actually a great film. And it just is not what we're talking about here. But you can have a really good time thinking about how all kinds of different media, fiction films, action franchises.
I'm actually just asking if they did something wrong by bringing something up and not addressing it. That's all I'm saying. They kind of didn't address a real crisis that was going on.
Well, one of the things that is the core often of the difference, and a film that comes from a script, a lot of those contradictions come out while the script is being written. Who's writing the script, who's making the movie, all of those things can be affected by regionalism. A friend of mine, Andy Davis, was a director of The Fugitive and The Package, and these very famous feature films. But Andy's from Chicago, and they're set in Chicago because of that. He wanted to go home. There's all this information about Chicago. Andy's sister, he tells this story, was a nurse at the time, and they're working on the script for The Fugitive, and they say, well, what could cause someone to actually murder, to do the things that this evil doctor had done? Where does his motivation come from? And his sister says, well, these drug companies do these clinical trials, and there actually have been cases where they fake their data, and there's millions and billions of dollars at stake. And it becomes, detectives come in, there've been all, and so he put that in the movie. That became his MacGuffin. So those kind of things happen in docudrama, and I think it's very important. For me, one of the real differences between documentary and docudrama, and I love a lot of docudramas, I think it's a great genre, but there is a script, and you're making the film to that script. What happens in documentary, especially verite documentary, something happens that you didn't expect, that isn't even, it's contradictory to maybe your original idea. In that scene with a little boy, I had no idea. I was like, well, let's go shoot. He's got to say goodbye to his school. Maybe it'll be emotional. And in a sense, in my mind, the end of the scene was when he hugged the teacher. That's what I thought would happen there. And it did happen. But what makes the scene is the way he walks out that door and the blast of the light coming in. So very often in documentaries, something has happened and is in your footage, and we're going to have to figure out how that changes our story and reshapes it. The story is constantly changing. In a sense, the script, they change script in feature films and docudrama all the time, too. They have to account for things that, don't make sense and that kind of thing. But to me, that's the exciting part of documentary and in the editing room, when it's like, oh my God, this happened. Now what do we do?
My friends, see this woman, Julie Turnock, right here? She has walked down here to tell us that we have enjoyed enough of your presence here, and it is time for us to draw this to an end. However, Gordon and I will be here for, a minute or two. So come and talk to us afterwards. Thank you so much for coming.